thought on this is that I think that trans women have a more beautiful understanding what womanhood is. I agree.
Transracial Black women like myself have a more beautiful understanding of Blackness than cisracial Black women. And that's what I want to talk about today.
They never actually said in the video that trans women have a better understanding of being a woman or are the most feminine women.
I've been asked are you planning on getting any medical procedures to help affirm your transracial identity, like melanin replacement therapy, things like that? And the answer is no. Trans Black women are Black women, regardless of what our bodies look like.
As an adoptee, but not a transracial adoptee, I really do hate when people use transracial as a term for this. My aggravation in a lot of these conversations is trans identities and trans people's realities are treated as this hypothetical thing. Like, I am 35 years old. I turn 36 next month. I transitioned quite young. The history that I have is real. It was not imagined. Drew Afualo and the Fight Master made some comments on a podcast that have gone viral again. These comments were repopularized by a conservative activist trying to sow discord between trans women and cis women, but it has caused controversy and a lot of conversation. One of those conversations is about transracial identities. Some of you guys may remember many years ago, I made a video about this exact topic. And as an adoptee, but not a transracial adoptee, I really do hate when people use transracial as a term for this. Let's watch this video and I will give you guys my thoughts.
Transracial Black women like myself have a more beautiful understanding of Blackness than cisracial Black women. And that's what I want to talk about today, especially because of all the propaganda nowadays telling Black women to hate themselves. Someone that chooses to present as a Black woman every single day, that's incredibly beautiful. One of the most common questions I've been asked is, are you planning on getting any medical procedures to help affirm your transracial identity, like melanin replacement therapy, things like that? And the answer is no. Trans Black women are Black women, regardless of what our bodies look like. I don't need to change my skin color or my hair or my makeup or any other physical characteristics to prove to you that I am Black. Saying that I need to pass as Black is actually trans race phobia. It is TERF rhetoric, transracial exclusionary feminism. One second. Oh, and by the way, free Palestine. My Starbucks identifies as Dunkin'. Inshallah. Shabbat Shalom. All that good stuff. So I do want to educate everyone on what it means to be a Black woman trapped inside a white woman's body, trapped inside an Asian woman's body, which is what I personally am, which means I am both trans Asian and trans Black. Transracial identities are valid. My pronouns, which are currently ni hao, are valid. All identities are valid. So if you are here to actually listen and learn, you can stay. But do not call me white. I do not identify with my race assigned at birth.
And, you know, I just know that there are some white dudes who are cracking up about this video. And it's totally unfunny. I understood that there were jokes in that video, but were they funny? No. Not because I was offended, because they're stupid and lowbrow. So let's go over some aspects of this, because there are a couple of different things you should gather from some of the things she said in this video. Something that bothers me, and maybe it's because I'm too literal, they never actually said in the video that trans women have a better understanding of being a woman or are the most feminine women. They just said that trans women have a more beautiful understanding of womanhood.
The thought on this is that I think that trans women have a more beautiful understanding what womanhood is. I agree. I think that unfortunately the programming for cis women is kind of sad sometimes.
Yeah, it is.
I'm like, actually, no, your womanhood is not your role. Mm-hmm. Your womanhood is not your status in society. And your womanhood is not your ability to be sexually assaulted.
In my video and also my article, I talk about how my issue with that quote is largely that it almost seems to suggest that a lot of transgender women don't have the relationship with their femininity and with their womanhood that is related to sexual violence, right? Sexual violence is something that a lot of transgender women experience, and it's very hard for a lot of us to separate that from our own conception of womanhood. Not that that's the only thing, but being concerned about being assaulted is a very common thing to fear when you're someone who experiences it frequently. And I acknowledge that for me, the frustration I have is that a lot of times these ideas about trans people come off as fetishistic, where trans people are deified, which is still a form of dehumanization. And they're seen as these pretty perfect, idealistic beings of femininity. But in all reality, that is still a form of dehumanization. So this is already kind of like a bad faith interpretation of what was said, because unlike what she's saying in this video, the point being made was not that trans women understand being a woman better than a cis woman, but that they have a more beautiful understanding. That was the argument being made. I also think that there is also something about this that reveals a flaw in the logic of what ER said in that video as well, because what she's understanding is that ER is celebrating trans women's femininity because trans women wake up every day and make the conscious choice to be a woman, the conscious choice to be feminine and to be seen in our culture in that way. I have to push back on that because that's not true. For a lot of trans people, maybe you could argue that transition is a choice, but being transgender is not really a choice. You can choose to medically transition, and maybe that will change a lot of the way people handle you. But ultimately, no one is choosing to be transgender. We are living with gender dysphoria, and transition is the way that you treat that. And then you live a certain way where you have a certain series of things that you have to face because of the way that you're factoring into society. My aggravation in a lot of these conversations is trans identities and trans people's realities are treated as this hypothetical thing. I think for most people in these conversations, it is purely hypothetical, right? Like, I am 35 years old. I turn 36 next month. I am somebody who definitely does not have an experience in our culture of being seen as a man. I transitioned quite young. The history that I have is real. It was not imagined. I've actually been speaking about it the entire time I've been on YouTube. I started a YouTube channel in 2005. And ever since then, I've been speaking about my actual lived experiences as a Black trans woman, right? I've had to accept, regardless of how I identify, regardless of how I feel about my own gender, I exist in a culture that has history where I will indeed be placed in a certain box and handled a certain way. I started my trans life as a person who was not a binary trans woman. I started as a genderqueer, genderfuck kind of person. And I had to realize that the shape of my body, keeping in mind I developed breasts as a teenager, is one where I am going to be essentialized in the female box more likely than not, which is a nice problem for a trans woman to have, but it's a problem that presents a whole slew of issues, right? Because what is one of the ways I had to register that? The fact that people were seeing me in a certain way in our culture, and sexual violence was something that visited me, right? It was something that visited me the moment I started having overtly feminine features that I didn't really choose. I was born with them. Of course, my journey is not every trans woman's journey, but for me, it is what it is. So I couldn't separate that and say my concerns are completely separated from the concerns cis women have, because it's not true. Thinking that way has been dangerous. Thinking in a way where my issues are completely separated from the issues of cis women has been dangerous. I've had to recognize that no, the thing that people are imagining happens where society treats me better because I was designated male at birth doesn't exist. I've had to acknowledge that because, well, half the time when I'm being sexually assaulted because they think I'm a cis woman. I spoke about Ron Jeremy sexually assaulting me, and one of the things he did was he put his hands down my pants and tried to finger me. And I had to explain to him that I was a transgender woman because his hands were literally on my genitalia. I didn't even get the opportunity to tell him no. He had decided to touch me. That is one of many of these scenarios I've been in, especially as a trans woman who doesn't drive and in various phases of her life has been living somewhat of a street life. It's something I've had to be real with myself about. So when I heard the commentary on that podcast, it was like, well, maybe this is true that many trans women have a very fanciful, happy vision of their femininity and being a woman. But like, for me, I've had to be real about the reality of sexual violence as a risk in my life. And so by the nature of it all, I've had to be self-aware, right? And that's kind of the problem I have with the way that Drew Afualo and ER spoke about this, because it really felt a bit like their opinions and feelings of trans women really relied on this specific space being drawn between themselves and trans women. Like, trans women are not integrated in their lives enough where they just simply understand that trans women, like cis women, are going to have a wide range of feeling about being a woman, right? It's not all going to be this one very positive thing. And I'm likely to say that people who feel that way have yet not experienced a lot of what comes with truly being seen as female in our culture. My positions come from having to recognize that regardless of how I may feel or other people may feel, I have been registered as female in this culture for most of my life, right? So I can't act like sexual violence and misogyny is not real. These things are things that I had to come to accept as part of what my experiences were going to be, right? Now, this is not a woman who is actually transracial, right? So we're not even going to entertain this like it is what is her name now? Nkiche Diallo or something like that. We're not even going to act like it's giving that, because this is just someone trying to make a joke and trying to make a point. But I do think that the video did reveal more layers of the wrong thinkingness of this. And again, I want to reiterate that I think Drew Afualo and ER had their hearts in the right place. They are trying to be affirming towards transgender women. But I think we have to go further. A lot of the way they talk about trans women really does seem like it's referring to trans women in the early days of their trans life. As I become almost 36, reaching the life expectancy of a transgender woman, a lot of times I think they don't expect for us to last that long. I think there's no way to be a woman in our culture for any extended period of time and not experience misogyny and the sexual violence that is visited upon you because of misogyny, right? Because of an entitlement to women's bodies. It is truly something that I think is impossible. And so when they talk about trans women feeling a certain way about their womanhood and having this rosy feeling about it, it's like, yeah, I feel like they probably feel that way now, but they won't always, right? And I think if you talk to older trans women who have been out for a bit longer, you're going to get a different answer. You may still get the happy answer, but you're going to get an answer that is not that dramatically different from a cis woman's answer, which of course is the centerpiece of the argument, that it's going to be a different answer. And I can say, I do think that there are certain things I will never experience because I'm not a cis woman. At the same token, I also know that in our culture, in our society, I'm not differentiated from cis women. And so I can't ignore all of the things that cis women have to also be aware of. I think the thing that's also really interesting about this is Black women were not in this, right? Like, I know that some people may think that Drew Afualo is a Black woman. She is Pacific Islander, and I love what she represents and how she represents for her culture. I think it's really fucking badass, and I really love her for it. Ultimately, I think that this is just a bunch of people trying to take her down. This is like the double whammy of taking down a powerful woman who has built a platform for herself, especially one where she often does attack conservative ideas, right? And then shifting it and destroying her platform really for the benefit of using transphobia to get a bunch of people to turn on trans women, even though trans women were not involved in the conversation at all. I really do think it's all about destroying women and tearing down women and removing their power. I think that's all this is. I really do. I really think it's nothing more than just a continuation of misogyny. I think that content creators like this are never really interested in actual engagement in the discourse. They're just trying to ride a trend, right? And so it's not even really worth having a serious conversation with a person like this. But I wanted to make a point that, yeah, this video was very, very silly. So those are my feelings about this particular video that's been going around. I would love to know what your guys' thoughts and feelings are about this topic, so please leave your thoughts and feelings in the comment box below. Until I see you guys next time, I want you to stay hot and introspective, and always remember, never forget that you are beautiful and you are loved. Bye!